Agent Scully, Agent Mulder, Chief Blevins assures us of your cooperation. We regret any inconvenience at this extreme hour.
We hope that your expertise in extraordinary phenomenon will help us answer some questions.
You're not FBI, are you?
Hello, and welcome to Discovering the X-Files, the podcast in which a newbie, that's me, takes a deep dive into the entirety of Chris Carter's creepy universe, as longtime fans escort me on the journey. A journey filled with paranoid conspiracies and monsters of the week. I'm Erix Antoine, and today Daniel and I will be discussing the episode Shadows, which originally aired in the US on October 22nd, 1993. It was written by Glenn Morgan and James Wong, and directed by Michael Lang. In this episode, Mulder and Scully investigate mysterious deaths linked to a secretary who may be haunted by the spirit of her dead boss, who is using her to uncover his murder, and also discover a conspiracy regarding covert arms deals made with Middle Eastern radicals. Yes, that's a handful. After the break, Daniel and I are going to get into it. Stick around.
You have been given the chance to tell him again. Take it. Tell him you love him by showing him, by helping us finish his unfinished business. Lauren, how will you ever be able to rest if he never can?
All right, so that was a weird episode, wasn't it? That's a strange little 45 minutes of television. Not sure if I mean that necessarily in a good way, but I guess I just have one little question, which, did it need to be that convoluted? You know what I mean? Like, was it necessary for it to be that convoluted? You know, Glenn Morgan and James Wong, 45-minute screenplay. Did you need to stick everything in there? Was it like a bunch of story conferences where you had all these disparate ideas? You go like, well, we could do this, we could do this, or we could. I mean, I will say this: I was entertained. I was entertained by what I watched. I had a few laughs. I'm not sure if it was exactly in the manner that its makers intended necessarily. I think that, but let's kind of backtrack. Let's go back to the beginning. You have an episode that is sort of set up like, and they even make an allusion to this in the episode itself, in the dialogue of the episode. They make a little joke where you have this setup that appears to be like they're doing a riff on Carrie, kinda like that's at first glance it seems to be that. Shortly after that, if you do some behind the scenes investigations, you find out that the writers were influenced by The Entity. And yes, there's a bit of that too. And then clearly this one episode might have been a huge influence on, video game genius David Cage, who, in his company Quantic Dream years later did a video game called Beyond Two Souls, which has a very similar sort of concept where you have this woman and you have this entity that it acts like a kind of de facto telekinesis, but it's actually like this ghost that is sort of there, like as a guardian angel kind of protector, and you as the player control both characters. And it's even this incredibly convoluted thing that involves conspiracies and the government and all this stuff going on. Basically, that's what it's like. They had all these ideas. It's like, well, you have this suicide that's maybe not a suicide, and then let's throw in a Middle Eastern terrorist cell in there, and let's throw in like corruption, like a Halliburton kind of thing. After a while, it's like it's a little bit. It's good. Like you go like, well, it's the X-Files, so it's got to have that paranoia thriller, but I'm like, but does it have to? Does every single that you have to do that? Like, is that necessary for this? What is really kind of a simple cockamamie story? So anyway, like I've already ranted. Like, go ahead and give me your take on it as a fan, because you might totally disagree with me. For as far as I'm concerned, maybe it's one of the maybe you think it's brilliant, and that's totally fine. I mean, go ahead and run it by me.
No, to go off on a bit of a tangent, what it reminded me of this time watching it is I was driving around. Sometimes I listen to film scores in the car. And I was driving around in the car once with my two kids, and the theme music for Dario Argento's Phenomena was playing.
Huh.
So often when I hear something like that, they'll ask me what's it from, or if it's from a movie, I'm supposed to tell them what it's about. I said, well, it's about this girl that I think her dad's either an actor or a rock star, but she gets sent off to this school off in Europe where you live there, and also she can talk to bugs. And they said, okay, what else? I said, well, there's this killer running around, knocking people off, and she's in the crosshairs of the killer. And they're like, okay, well, what else? I said, well, the killer's a little mutant dwarf that uses a giant spear to kill people with. And they say, oh, okay, well, what else? I said, well, there's also this doctor who gets murdered, and then his chimpanzee who loved him so much that he's distraught by his master's murder runs around with a little razor blade attempting to avenge him. And they said, oh, okay, what else? I'm like, what else do you need? It's already gone 3 steps too far. That's kind of the way this episode is. To break down the plot, just in case anyone might be listening to this that hasn't watched it yet. Basically, you have this secretary who's distraught over her boss's suicide. Well, it turns out that he didn't kill himself. He was murdered, and it was made to look like a suicide. So we have this scenario where you have a secretary in peril who's being protected by her boss's spirit, now a poltergeist, and she's wrapped up in something that involves her boss's corrupt business partner who has been selling parts and profiting from terrorism. So you have terrorists running around in the episode. You also have either the CIA, well, I guess it's the CIA on top of that. And then you have Mulder and Scully walking into the middle of this on top of that. So it's like a feature's worth of storylines just jammed together and shoved into like a 45-minute episode, and it's absolutely ridiculous. Nothing gets time to breathe, and you kind of don't think how ridiculous it is while you're watching it, because it's just plot beat, plot beat, plot beat, plot beat, plot beat. There's never any time for you to stop and think about what's going on until it's over, and then realize exactly how insane it all is. I guess the simplified version of this would be her boss was killed by his corrupt business partner who wanted to keep all the money for himself. That would be the way to simplify it. But then you wouldn't have all the government and terrorist intrigue and the assassins and the CIA calling in Mulder and Scully as experts on the paranormal and their weird ass little murder case. It's just absolutely insane.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's just that the way you simplified it, you just showed a clear path. Because how does this start? Well, I mean, it starts, we meet the secretary, we meet this week's guest star, this week's quote unquote monster, which isn't really her, but we meet her in the very beginning. The boss has just died. Clearly she's very distraught by this. Clearly she cared for him. Clearly it was a good thing, whatever. And now she's very sad about his death. And then shortly after this, in part of the cold open, again, very convoluted cold open, because you have that, and then there's something weird going on in that office. Like I think they try to give you the impression that something moves by the power of her mind. They're still sort of pulling that off. She leaves the office, gets mugged. Apparently, her muggers. We're not too clear exactly on what's happening, but there's something going on there. And then all of a sudden, cut to these two squatters. They're the best dressed squatters I've ever seen, and at least that's what I think. Is they're going like, oh, we can crash in that apartment up there. Why don't you pull down the fire escape? And I'm like, you guys seem like you don't live on the streets or anything. I mean, you seem like you're doing pretty well for yourselves. Anyway, so you pull that down, and then you have this nice little shock thing with two dead guys who turn out to be, Middle Eastern terrorists. Here's the thing. That could have just as easily been much more simple. You have the mysterious deaths of, let's say, two muggers, and that's what attracts, Mulder and Scully to the case. Sure, you can have the whole thing where it's the ghost of her boss who wants justice for his murder, which was made to look like a suicide, and that's already pretty hefty, and I think that's enough. But since they want to throw in this whole other thing where I still don't understand why it needed all that. I like why they felt that it needed all that, and it raises a whole bunch of questions because clearly this ghost has the power to kill people indiscriminately and viciously, and at least they never make it clear that he has to be near her in order to perform the killings. If that were an element of the plot, it would make a little more sense. But I go, like, if I'm a ghost and I'm a sentient ghost, as this poltergeist is, and in fact I'm so sentient and so vivid that I can be photographed, and I can somehow mysteriously appear in a very clear way, and that where they have this thing that looks like a publicity photo of the actor, like just show up in that weird picture they take of the woman, and then the ghost just appears and it's clear, and they even go like, oh well, that he's still alive because there he is in that picture. Now, my point is, if I'm a ghost who is very sentient and who can kill brutally, and I'm pissed off because my business partner, fucked me over, murdered me essentially, why don't I just fucking kill him? Like, why doesn't this ghost just kill his crooked business partner? I mean, okay, I'm guessing it's because it's not just that, it's about uncovering the truth of the corruption that's going on. That floppy disk that for some reason is like stuck in the wallpaper. Like what? Like I don't like what. There's a floppy disk that has incriminating evidence, and it's stuck in the wall. I'm still trying to figure that part out because I know that like that whole spectacular showdown at the end of the episode, where she's clearly screaming, no, don't kill him, show us where the evidence is. Yeah, good idea, but my point is it's just a whole big what. It's like a kitchen sink thing where I don't know if they ever really, I think they had a bunch of concepts, they just threw it all together, and it's just funny to me, like what, like the agents, the CIA, right? Is it the CIA or the NSA who are investigating, the big black guy who never talks and is just looking ominous, and then will occasionally say just one line. Like, that's funny, but and they're the NSA, right?
I don't even know.
I mean, yeah, it's like they're okay, but there's some agency, not the FBI. Obviously, they don't work with Mulder and Scully. So, and if this is, if this has to do with terrorism and whatever, of course, it's the CIA. So, whatever, they're investigating, I guess, the corruption going on at this. I mean, it's a defense contractor. I mean, that's what this place is, but they've also been kind of making under the table deals with terrorists who want to kill this woman. Why exactly? I don't like really understand that exactly, because like, why do they go after her? Because she knows, like, okay, and anyway, it's just so much stuff going on, and then she confronts. She says she wants to quit, and confronts the corrupt partner, who's like, I'm not going to let you leave. But then he says, okay, I'll let you, because he feels the presence of, again, that scene doesn't make any sense, but it's a funny scene. And then he sends killers after her anyway. Like, that's one of the funniest scenes in the episode, when the two like assassins break into her house to kill her. You need two of them to presumably kill like an unarmed secretary. They both break in, and one of them looks like, he basically looks like Michael Richards' stunt double, and like so, and he gets choked. That's really funny. Like the whole, like, it's just, there's just too much going on in this episode. It's just fucking weird. I don't get it. I don't understand what was going on.
Before we start to break everything down, I want to read something here. to you.
Sure.
Apparently, here, this is a chunk off of Wikipedia. It says co-writer James Wong felt that the changes he was asked to make to the script led to Shadows turning out to be an average episode. His partner Glenn Morgan had a similar opinion, calling it a little too ordinary, like you have seen it before, which is exactly what the network wanted at the time. And then Chris Carter himself called it more of a meat and potatoes kind of story. What?
What were these people smoking? Ordinary? Like you've seen it before? I mean, look, to be fair, I guess the individual elements, sure, I've seen that before. We've seen that before. Naming the influences, Carrie, the entity, 3 Days of the Condor, like whatever it was, like we've seen it before, but we've never seen it before together. Like, we've never seen all of those things at once. And I would say, I think it's kind of admirable that they went and did that, even if what they ended up with didn't make any fucking sense. But it wouldn't make any sense. How could anything make sense when you put all these elements in that way? And did you know something kind of weird about this episode? That it is so messy that Mulder and Scully are kind of, I mean, maybe I'm imagining things, but I kind of felt like they were barely in it.
Kind of, yeah.
You barely feel them in it. Like they're such non-agents in the story. I mean, if you think about it, they do nothing to progress anything. Like they're not responsible for anything that happens in terms of figuring things out, because things just kind of happen. And they're in their investigation. When they go to question her, then, I mean, the killer in whose best, the poltergeist, the murderous poltergeist, in whose best interests it is for the truth to be found out, decides he wants to sabotage, potentially murder the people who are actually on the verge of discovering the truth for whatever reason. And okay, so you have that, but you never have a situation where Mulder and Scully are like, okay, we figured this out, we figured that out. No, it's all just, ultimately the poltergeist, shows them where the mysterious floppy disk is. And again, I can't get past the fact that it's just stuck in the wall. It's far-fetched enough that it would even be in that office. But okay, fine, let's say it's in that office, but why is it behind a fucking wall? I mean, you might as well just destroy the floppy disk at that point.
You're not wrong. The most proactive thing that Mulder and Scully do that leads to anything whatsoever is him handing her his cell phone number at one point, which she finally does call later on. Everything else they do is just confirming information that they've been handed, like, yes, Howard is really dead, and them conferring with the government agents. But, I mean, even when they question her, she never opens up either time. They don't get her to convince the ghost to not kill the guy. She does it on her own. It's just, it really is them guest starring in her episode more than anything.
Yeah. So they feel like guest stars in their own series, in like their own series, where, and that's very strange. And I mean, I'm not saying it's unique. This is something that sometimes happens in a lot of shows, but it's always a problem, because what it shows is that the writers came up with, I guess what I see here is that they had an idea for a story. I mean, they had several ideas, clearly, but let's pretend that it's just that they actually consciously said, well, how about this weird conspiracy thriller about a murdered dude and his secretary and etc. Right? Okay.
Yeah.
And then after they had that, and they probably outlined the story like anyone would, and in the best way that they could, even with something this convoluted. And then they figured out, okay, well, this isn't the X-Files. We got to stick Mulder and Scully in here. So I guess let's just stick them in here. Let's have them be audience surrogates, essentially. And you can't, like, that's not what you should do. You can't have them both just be observers. You can't, that ultimately I'm going to lose my way because I don't give a shit about this secretary. I don't. It's the first time I've seen her. I mean, I'm sorry. And if I'm watching this on a weekly basis, you haven't given me enough to care. And since it's such an out there story about a conspiracy that I don't care about and that is not compelling enough for me to care about. And so really the only thing that I would care about at that point is Mulder and Scully. So if even they're just sort of non-agents, then I ultimately don't really care about anything. And so the reason that I was entertained by this episode was simply because it's so absurd and because the action sequences, like the throttling of Michael Richards' stunt double, or the finale in the corrupt business partner's office where all the papers are flying around and the guy's getting like thrown around, and then the letter opener that serves as the whole thing is just I was laughing because like everything about it was just really funny. And I looked up on Wikipedia, apparently the tagline, the way they sold this episode to viewers was, they sold it around the whole idea of a poltergeist and some like, don't watch it alone, and then I'm going, don't watch it alone. Yes, because perhaps if you're watching it alone and you're eating a sandwich, you'll start choking and you'll need somebody to like, to give you the Heimlich maneuver. So don't watch it alone. I don't, it's strange. I mean, I don't, and for Chris Carter to call it a meat and potatoes episode, like I'm going like an ordinary episode. Yeah, no, this is not one that I would show anyone to say, oh yeah, the X-Files. It's just, watch Shadows. That's the episode that's going to give you it's a real meat and potatoes. It's kind of straightforward. You can just sit down and watch it. No, I don't I don't know if that'd be a good idea. I think it might turn people off the show.
It finally clicked with me retroactively what this episode is. If you take the movie Eraser, pull out Arnold and put in a poltergeist, that's this episode. Because you still have the secretary, you still have the defense contractors selling shit to people they shouldn't, and then you have some insane unstoppable force running around killing the shit out of everyone who tries to get a hold of her. It's Eraser with a poltergeist.
Well, actually, that's a very good comparison. You're right.
And it's no less ridiculous.
Yeah, it's pretty much. I mean, you're right, and I think that's basically the problem. I think that it's like, okay, so Glenn Morgan and James Wan basically had an idea for, let's say, a weird supernatural thriller, a kind of like a kitchen sink supernatural thriller, not unlike Final Destination, which I know they didn't write, but I'm saying like not unlike that, because you have these mysterious deaths, these kind of like force of nature deaths that are happening. The same concept might actually work for a weird horror movie, for a weird kind of slasher movie where you have this ghost that's killing everybody, involved in some convoluted government conspiracy. So it would probably work better as like a trashy B movie, like a 90-minute, just kind of pad it out a bit more, add a few more characters, kill a few more people, make the deaths more gory and so on. Like have the ghost throw people around the room, impale them, like just come up with really elaborate Omen style deaths, like in Final Destination. And yeah, I mean, it would probably work a lot better as just this weird B movie that you don't really have to pay attention to. You're just sort of watching it because it's got a lot of cool deaths and you're just sort of just having a good time, which again, that's the part that entertains about this episode, that it's just so ridiculous. And you have all these weird killings and all this just nonsense that for that moment you're entertained. And it's not until you start to think about what you're watching that you realize that none of it's making any fucking sense. And that was the thing. I mean, you said that it's retroactive. For me, it wasn't so retroactive. For me, it kind of was as I was watching it, because when you're sitting down and you're watching it, you're trying to follow it. Like it's the X-Files. It's an investigation. It's whatever it is, and you're trying to follow it. You're trying to get sucked in. But at one point, that's what happened. It's like at first I was trying to follow it, and then they just kept bringing up some new thing, some new wrinkle. And that's where I started asking myself, wait a minute, so what, like, And then I just had too many questions, and I was like, but why? And then, what does this have to do with anything? And then why did they have to do that? And then, you just begin to sort of question it. And so by the time I got to the end, I was like, yeah, that was certainly strange. But I mean, I wasn't bored. I'll say that. At no point was I bored. But well, okay, I did start to get a little bit bored because towards like the very end, maybe the last 10 minutes, where it's just a lot of sort of talky bullshit, really. At that point, I was just like, all right, dude, just let's wrap this up. I think we got what we needed. They found the disc. All right, it's done. The thing just kept going and going, and just kind of like, But apart from that, I mean, it's not boring. It's ridiculous, but it's not boring.
Yeah, it really has the exact opposite problems of the last episode we watched. The Jersey Devil is kind of a lackluster Monster of the Week episode. It never goes far enough with anything that it's playing with. Whereas this one goes way too far on every level. It's like just opposite ends of the spectrum. One is way too little and the other one is way too damn much. And there's little things within it that I find intriguing. Like, I love the fact that a government agency is actually contacting Mulder and Scully to come in as experts in their weird little field to get their opinion on something, and they're completely serious about it. They're not cracking jokes like, oh, someone made us bring you in. Like, they legitimately want them there to hear from them, which means, I mean, you could spin a lot of stuff off from that. Why do they believe them? Do they know something that Mulder and Scully don't know? Are there other things out there that they're aware of that lead them to believe that it would be a good idea to bring the two X-Files agents in to help them on their investigation? Like, there's clearly some sort of hidden level of respect, professional respect that they have for them to call them in on something like that during the middle of the night, apparently. And it never touches on that whatsoever. That's completely glossed over. Just move right on by it and nary a word said about it.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. I'll give it some points for, like, the guest actors are pretty good. Like, I think the main woman, the actress's name is Lisa Waltz, and she looks familiar, but I couldn't place her, honestly. She's one of those shows up in every other episode of something, so I'm sure that's why she looked familiar. But she was pretty good. I mean, she conveys that sort of desperation, the vulnerability. She gives a decent performance. The corrupt business partner is also a pretty good villain. He's immediately unlikable. Like, for the moment he appears on screen, he's just immediately sleazy and gross, and just immediately. And he's got some really funny line deliveries, like when he at the end, he's like, "You stupid bitch," or whatever. He's going like, "Oh yeah, 10 p.m. Like, put the kids to bed." It's not that it's badly acted or anything. It's everything's done competently enough. It has good special effects for sure. It maintains the production value of the show is as good as ever. It's never too in your face or corny or over the top in that aspect. The special effects are convincing. They're minimalist and they work. It's only humorous because of the context of what you're seeing. Like watching this guy get strangled by an invisible force is just it's funny. And
slapping him around a little bit. That got a bit Sam Raimi there for a second, but they were smart enough to cut away after a couple hits.
Yeah. I think because again, like you said, if you overdo it, you run the risk of it being too Sam Raimi and then too deliberately funny. But it was still funny. I mean, just because the moment that I thought he looked like Kramer, like a slightly younger Kramer, and then just getting slapped around and getting choked out and all that, it's still funny just in theory. But
I like that he kicks the door in, pops open his switchblade like a greaser villain, and tells his partner to go ahead and draw the bath. Like, all right, here, we're here to do it. We get to do it again. Yeah.
Yeah. So then the implication is that these are the same two sons of bitches who did the other guy, right? I mean, They stage that suicide. That's what they do, you know. It was kind of weird because the same evening, like I watched this, but shortly before this, I watched some CSI. I watched the CSI episode that is also about a killer staging suicides in bathtubs. So I just thought, it's strange coincidence. Wasn't planned, but it came out that way. But yeah, I mean, again, like that's an interesting concept, but I mean, it doesn't really belong on the X-Files, the mysterious murders, because X-Files is about supernatural weirdness. So obviously, if it were just some serial killer staging suicides, well, that's not that's not good enough. So you got to add something else. You got to add the detail of, let's make it a ghost that wants revenge for this. Okay, that's good, but hang on, he wants revenge because his partner had him killed. Okay, fair enough. Because his partner was selling weapons to terrorists. Because and so on and so on. And he felt so guilty because they throw in that whole thing too about like he's guilt ridden because of the bombing. So that's why it's convincing that he killed himself in theory. But if that's supposed to be a secret, why would that be the motivation? Because I'm assuming that it's not supposed to be common knowledge that this company is selling weapons to terrorists. So him being guilt-ridden about that is not something that anybody would know, right? I mean, but I guess it's so that people in the inner circle won't suspect anything, I guess. I don't know. It's just a lot of details, a lot of stuff going on, and not really making a lot of sense. And that's ultimately what it is. And I'll also say that there is a possibility that when this played in '93, maybe it just was so off the wall that people were more taken by it. I would have to see what retrospective reviews say of it, but I would imagine maybe in '93, this had a slightly, maybe just the off the wall nature of it just seemed fresh. And when you sit back and watch it now, you go like, wait a minute, what is all this? I don't know.
I can, as someone who watched it the night it aired, because I know I saw this one when it aired, and have seen it a few times since. I don't quite remember what my reaction was, but I can tell you this for a fact. I knew when I hit play on it that it was the dead boss as a poltergeist protecting the secretary that was effectively the daughter he never had. I remembered that. I remembered that the other boss was corrupt and that he was behind it. I remembered absolutely nothing about the terrorists or the NSA or anything else from the episode. My mind had just toned it down to a single basic concept, and that is absolutely not what this episode is.
What are you doing, Scully? You don't believe.
Mulder, there's no such thing as ghosts or psychokinesis. I'm sure there's an explanation, but I believe that she believes. And my priority is to get her to help us stop Dorland.
Well, we may have just sacrificed our best opportunity to observe spectral phenomena.
No, I'm giving us the chance to solve a case that's tangible instead of chasing after shadows.
And there you have it. I hope you enjoyed our discussion, and if you did, please subscribe to the podcast, give us a like, take a minute to write a positive review, and go ahead and spread the word on social media. The podcast is available on Anchor FM, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other platforms. Look for the Erix Antoine Network on Facebook. You can also follow me on Twitter at ErixAntoineNet, and check out my film reviews on Letterboxd. You should also check out Daniel Baldwin's website, theschlocketeer.com, and follow him on Twitter at Daniel W. Baldwin. I'm Erix Antoine, and I'll be back in a few days to talk about Ghost in the Machine, which has nothing to do with that forgotten 90s horror movie directed by Rachel Talalay, or much less the song by Sarah Brightman. My dear friend Natalia Castro will be chiming in from Colombia for that one, and I hope you'll join us. So until then, let's all remember that the truth is out there. See you next time.